Welcome back. We are jumping into a deep dive today that, frankly, deals with some very real and sometimes deadly risks facing foreigners living and working across Asia. Our sources today pull together a stack of recent events, and they really paint a clear picture of escalating urgency, synthesizing situations that demand immediate and heightened awareness from anyone spending extended time abroad. Okay, so let's try and unpack this a bit. We're essentially looking at two profoundly different, but I think equally serious types of threats. On one hand, you've got these catastrophic, immediate public safety failures, just awful stuff. And then on the other, there are these quieter, maybe more insidious institutional dangers, things like tightening anti-espionage laws, lethal exposure driven by global politics, very different feel.
That's exactly right. Our mission here is to, well, quickly connect the dots between these high-impact events. We'll focus specifically on a devastating tragedy in Kuwait and then these tightening legal restrictions in China. The aim isn't just safety tips. It's about shifting focus to robust risk management. Understanding how rapid shifts in local environments are fundamentally changing the vulnerability profile for really the entire expatriate community.
Okay, let's start with the most immediate, the most tragic risk, physical danger. The severe health crisis that unfolded in Kuwait, it involved illicit substances, and the consequences for the migrant worker community were devastating and instant.
Yeah, this incident was just horrific, both in its scale and, honestly, its preventability. We're talking
Yeah.
about 13 Asian expatriates who died, and another 63 rushed to the hospital, all after ingesting methanol-tainted black market alcohol. And the sources are clear. The victims were overwhelmingly from the construction workforce. People absolutely essential to the local economy, but often relying on these informal support structures.
The data here is genuinely shocking. I mean, the sheer scale of this preventable tragedy, that's what really struck me. And we absolutely need to talk about methanol because this is where the risk becomes, well, terrifyingly specific. It's often used as an industrial solvent, right? And it's lethally toxic, even in tiny amounts.
Precisely. It's not like ethanol, which is the alcohol people can consume. Methanol attacks the body incredibly quickly. We saw symptoms leading rapidly to critical organ failure, people suffering just immediate health degradation. I mean, the sources mention permanent blindness for 21 victims, dozens needing urgent life-saving measures like kidney dialysis or ventilators.
It's not just a bad hangover, is it? It's instant, permanent devastation.
Exactly.
And the crucial context here, it seems, is the systemic issue that leads to this kind of black market in the first place. Kuwait has strict prohibition on alcohol, so if you remove the legal regulated supply, doesn't that automatically push people, especially those with fewer resources, into the hands of unregulated criminal suppliers?
That's the core insight, yes. The toxic liquor was reportedly sold in a known black market district. It specifically targets populations who have limited legal ways to get safer alternatives. So the danger isn't just the substance itself, it's the regulatory environment that basically creates this danger zone.
Right. So do our sources reflect on the pressure, maybe, on authorities to address this? Because it sounds like a known problem, this black market, something that's been brewing.
They do mention the response. It was immediate and comprehensive. Urgent investigations, massive hospital responses, intensified raids trying to disrupt the illegal suppliers. They also collaborated closely with the embassies of the affected nations to manage the crisis and help the victims and their families. But, I mean, the fact that such a massive reactive response was necessary, it really underscores the endemic nature of the problem, especially for transient labor populations. These groups often live and work outside the scope of reliable, formal infrastructure. And this is maybe where the need for established long-term support for professionals, like, say, reliable serviced accommodations, really contrasts with the informal, often unsafe networks these more vulnerable populations might rely on.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's make a significant shift now. We're moving from that immediate physical, almost chemical danger to a completely different kind of risk. Abstract, maybe, but equally critical. We're talking about the danger of legal and geopolitical entanglement.
Right. We need to look at the recent diplomatic caution issued by the Japanese government regarding their nationals in China. This is a very different kind of risk assessment than, avoiding tainted alcohol.
Absolutely. And the warning was explicit, wasn't it? Japanese nationals have been officially cautioned by their own government about the risk of being inadvertently caught up in Beijing's tightening anti-espionage laws. This feels like a major change in the operating environment for business travelers, for long-term expatriates.
It is. The Japanese embassy's advisory wasn't vague at all. It specifically urged expatriates to avoid actions that could be misinterpreted as spying. It emphasized the heightened scrutiny they now face under revised Chinese law.
So what kind of actions are we talking about? Does it get specific?
Well, it implies that activities previously considered maybe routine business intelligence gathering, things like collecting public domain economic data, perhaps doing detailed market research, or even meeting local government contacts without very strict official oversight. These could now potentially be flagged, things that might have seemed normal, say, 5 years ago.
This is where the depth of this deep dive really matters, I think. It's not just about staying away from obviously classified information. If you're a business traveler or part of a corporate team setting up operations, you're expected to gather good information, right? To do due diligence. So how does this new legal landscape change that fundamental function, that corporate intelligence gathering in China?
It essentially introduces legal tripwires, where maybe there weren't clear ones before.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this warning reflects growing geopolitical tension. And those tensions, they translate directly into domestic legal complexities for foreigners on the ground.
So it's not just spies anymore.
Exactly. You no longer need to be a government official or involved in something obviously sensitive to potentially fall under suspicion.
Yes.
Simply operating professionally in certain sectors, perhaps tech or finance, could expose you. It really underscores how shifting regulations and these expanding definitions of national security are creating new legal complexities for foreigners across various Asian destinations.
The contrast between these two situations, Kuwait and China, is really striking when you put them side by side. On one hand, you have this raw physical vulnerability for expats driven by local prohibition and reliance on dangerous black markets. And on the other, this sort of creeping severe legal risk driven by international relations and changing domestic policies. But both, fundamentally, seem to point to the same underlying reality, escalating vulnerability for people living and working abroad.
That's absolutely the common thread. These incidents, though different, they really underline the precarious position of many expatriate populations. Whether they're relying on informal networks for basic needs like we saw so tragically in Kuwait, or they're trying to navigate these incredibly complex legal gray zones for professional work like in China. They're often the first to feel the impact of abrupt changes, be it local dangers or shifts in national security laws.
So what does all this mean for you, our listener? If you might be living, working, or perhaps setting up a long-term professional stay in the region. Our sources seem to distill some key guidance points, and they focus less on just common sense, maybe more on strategic vigilance.
All right. The first and perhaps most urgent lesson from the Kuwait tragedy is about strategically analyzing environments where the state has tight control over certain goods or activities. Like if your host country has strict prohibition laws, like on alcohol, you have to recognize that this guarantees a black market exists, and that market is inherently dangerous, period. So absolute avoidance of unregulated or homemade substances isn't just advice, it's mandatory. Because the consequences, as we saw, can be immediate and catastrophic.
Okay, so that shifts the advice from just don't drink bad stuff to something more systemic. Recognize the inherent risk created by prohibition itself. Makes sense. Second, then, focusing on the China situation, vigilance needs to extend beyond just physical safety, right, into legal risk.
Yeah. Exactly. Pay constant, close attention to government advisories from your home country and local regulatory changes in the host country, especially anything regarding information sharing, due diligence practices, national security definitions. Things can change incredibly quickly, and, well, ignorance really isn't a defense in these situations.
You need to stay informed. And the third point.
And third, it's about recognizing the professional need for reliable resources, particularly for longer stays or corporate teams. The focus really has to be on using formal, established, reliable support networks for everything. That means secure, vetted accommodations, not just informal sublets. It means access to proper legal counsel. Basically, avoid relying on unofficial or informal advice when you're dealing with critical health or potential legal issues. Seek immediate official help if you experience symptoms of poisoning, obviously, but also if you face any kind of legal scrutiny. You really need that stable infrastructure, that reliable base, like, say, established service department providers offer, especially when the broader environment feels volatile or uncertain.
Absolutely. That formal support structure becomes crucial. So the central takeaway here seems to be that security today, for expats in Asia, requires proactive monitoring of two very different threat vectors. You've got the physical safety failures, which often hit vulnerable populations hardest. And then you have these institutional legal tripwires that increasingly threaten professionals and corporate teams, especially in geopolitically sensitive areas.
Precisely. By staying actively informed, by being vigilant about both the physical dangers and the legal frameworks of their host countries, expatriates can significantly better protect themselves in what is clearly a rapidly evolving environment.
So, to wrap up, we've covered the immediate fatal risk exemplified by the Kuwait tragedy, the dangers of illicit substances in environments with strict controls. And we've contrasted that with the growing, often less visible, risk of legal entanglement driven by geopolitical tensions and tightening laws, as seen in the warnings about China. Both demand a much higher level of caution and really systemic awareness from foreigners across the region.
And that leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given that heavy reliance on informal networks, we talked about the very thing that fueled the Kuwait tragedy, which is a reality for many expatriates, not just laborers. How effectively are official government warnings and diplomatic advisories, like the one from Japan regarding China, truly reaching the most vulnerable populations on the ground, the ones who might need them most? And what knowledge gaps still exist between that official risk management guidance, often aimed at corporations or seasoned professionals, and the day-to-day reality for individuals trying to manage their life and work safely in these complex environments? We encourage you to perhaps explore that relationship between stable, formal expatriate support structures, things like reliable housing and information channels, and how effectively individuals can actually comply with local laws and navigate risks. Something to mull over.